Hello and welcome to the official podcast of Palate Exposure, featuring Ilona Thompson, a podcast for those seeking the ultimate in wine, food, and travel. Each week she interviews winemakers, chefs, celebrities, and a variety of guests that shape the way we enjoy life.
Hi, this is Ilona Thompson with Palate Exposure. I'm here with Armen Khachaturian, or if some of you know Russian or other languages, such as Armenian, it's actually Khachaturian. I hope I said that correctly.
Close enough.
Close enough. Khachaturian. I'll have to practice.
Khachaturian.
Khachaturian. Yeah, that ha is really important. He's a director of sales at Clos Du Val, famed Napa Valley winery. But first and foremost, he's a storyteller.
Yeah.
And we're here to learn about his personal story as well as professional. I really can't wait to dive in because I know there's so many facets to Armen. So we'll start with your background and your childhood. We all came from somewhere.
We did. Born in Iran, in Tehran, Iran.
Oh my goodness.
Back when Iran was our ally, when the Shah was the president, and left in the end of '77.
Wow.
Moved to New York. Was there for about 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Then moved to Southern California, to Glendale, because that's kind of where Armenians moved to.
Yeah.
And grew up in Glendale. And, I don't know much about Iran. We left, not allowed to go back because of political asylum. And, Armenians being Christians in a country that is not Christian, once the Shah was gone, all of a sudden the Armenians were like, okay, time to go somewhere safe. So a lot of the Armenian, and how Armenians ended up in Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Greece, when you look at the history, it all stemmed from the genocide.
Yeah.
When they all ended up going anywhere they could. So then you have Armenians all over the world. And so, moved to the United States and grew up in Southern California until about 20 years ago.
Oh.
So I moved up to Northern California.
It's really interesting. Historically, Armenians became a nomadic culture because they were forced to be.
Yeah.
So did the family move to Northern California from
No.
there,
I moved to Northern California. My mom is still in Southern California. My sister moved to Indiana with her husband. He's a professor at Purdue, archaeology.
Interesting.
And so yeah, we're kind of all over. But
what motivated the Northern California move?
So it's interesting. Growing up Armenian, you're taught to do three things in your life professionally: doctor, lawyer, dentist, in that order. And that's how you're going to make your family proud. And I knew I wasn't going to do any of the three. Ended up a good friend of mine told me I was kind of doing the JC thing for a while, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I was working a lot. He's like, "Why aren't you back in school?" I said, "Oh, I don't know what I want to do. Oh, I can't afford it." I just came up with excuses. And, he was getting his master's in pathology. He's now a neurosurgeon. So I take his advice pretty well. And he looked at me and he goes, "They'll pay you to go to school." And I said, "They'll what?" He goes, "Yeah, that you can get scholarships and they will pay you to go to school."
Oh.
And I was like, wow, imagine not having to work and get an education at the same time. So I ended up moving to Rohnert Park, went to Sonoma State. Initially, I didn't know what I wanted to get education-wise, but within 3 months of being there, I knew exactly what I was going to do. And I was going to get my degree in wine business strategies.
Okay. So people that come to wine, usually the pathway leads through wine, not through a university. So how did that play out?
So I was always interested in wine.
Okay.
Because when you meet a lawyer, there's always like, oh, I'm the top lawyer, or a doctor, I'm the top doctor in this field. There's always a top person.
Yeah.
In wine, there really isn't. Even if you have a master somm or a master of wine, they're always learning. There's nobody that's going to sit there and say, I know everything and I'm done learning.
And because if they do, don't listen to them.
Yeah. Because there's always learning.
Yes.
And that intrigued me. And the fact that it didn't matter whether you were a novice or whether you're a professional, there's something that equalizes all of us. When we sit around a table with a bottle of wine,
Yeah.
because someone is learning something new, and someone might know, but they're also learning something. There's always something new to learn. And it was interesting that you're not going to come across someone that says, I know everything. You can't teach me anything.
I have to speculate that your family culture was definitely food friendly and might be wine friendly as well, but food has to be a huge centerpiece.
Well, yeah,
really.
food was always there. My father and his sisters owned a catering company. So growing up, I grew up in a big catering kitchen, running around and having those smells of food.
Oh my.
And but as a kid, I mean, I had all these amazing dishes that I crave for now that will take 8 hours to make. But I wanted to go to the dry storage room and get a 4-pack of Oreo cookies. Because I'm a kid and that's what you do.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, food was always a part of it, and wine was never shunned. Wine was there, but the quality of wine that we drank growing up was not the quality of wine that I drink today. But it all started somewhere. I mean, in high school, underage drinking is horrible, but the reality is, in high school, people would take beers to parties. I found Boone's Strawberry Hill, and I was like, that's kind of wine. So it started from there, and I remember Vendange Rosé or White Zinfandel or something.
Of course.
And then it went to Sebastiani Cabernet.
Mm-hmm.
And I still remember the 1996 Sonoma County Sebastiani Cabernet. You can find it, and it was like $20. And I thought I struck gold. I was like, this is so good.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was also my discovery of wine. And I could go back home and be like, hey, Mom, look what I found.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome. So Sonoma State really kind of shaped a lot of your perceptions, right, of the wine culture?
It did, because I was working in a restaurant during the week, serving tables. And then on the weekends, I was working at a tasting room, pouring wine and talking about wine. And the first winery I worked at was Fritz Winery. Mm-hmm. And I remember I'd be at that, in the tasting room, Saturday, Sunday, 8 hours, 10 hours each day up in Cloverdale and northern part of Dry Creek. And I knew more about those 6 wines that were in front of me than our guests did. And so I can talk to them about that. But then they would teach me about things that they had tried that I didn't know.
Yeah.
And so I was teaching and learning at the same time. And that's when I was like, okay, I can do this. People are happy. No one's upset. If they get a missed shipment or something, they're like, where's the wine? People find a way to figure it out. But it's fun. It's meant to be fun. It's meant to bring people together.
Yeah.
And so there was none there. I never had a day I'd go there and be like, oh God, I got to pour wine for people today. So, and I've always been a people person. I love people. I could be exhausted, and you give me a choice between why don't you go sleep or why don't you go talk to these 6 people, and I'll talk to the 6 people for hours and just have a good time, and then finally time for sleep. But that feeds my soul. People feed my soul.
Wine is about hospitality. Yeah. If you lead with hospitality, everything else really takes a bit of a backseat.
Sure.
People don't remember the exact descriptions, name of vineyards, flavor profiles, technical notes. That can be found on a website. What is irreplaceable is that human touch. And you clearly honed into it early on, and it aligned with who you are.
It did. And it's interesting because a lot of people have asked me to go, why is it you do what you do? How is it you do what you do? I don't know. It's, I enjoy it.
Second nature.
Yeah.
I can tell by the way you speak about it. You're smiling.
Yeah. I'm it's funny. I tend to smile a lot.
Yeah. So there you were at Sonoma State. What was your degree in?
It's a business degree with a concentration in wine business strategies.
Very cool. And you were kind of ahead of your time.
I was the 4th graduating class.
Mm-hmm.
The first graduating class had 2 students in there. And then there was like 4 students in the second graduating class.
Yeah.
And I think they had like 8 or 12, somewhere in between in the third. And then our group, I think, was somewhere between 16 and 20.
Hard to believe. It's such a popular degree now.
Now it is,
I understand. Yeah. So you were actually kind of pioneering.
Yeah, well, we had a lot of
curriculum, was designed on the spot in some ways, right?
The teachers were teaching, but they were learning as well.
Yeah.
And I remember the professor was like, we're going to hold on to your papers. So every paper we did, every presentation we did, the professors held on to it.
That's so cool.
And I think they held on to it because they're like, I like the content and I want to see how we can share this next semester. So they were learning at the same time. One of my favorite professors was Dr. Liz Tosh. Liz Tosh had moved to Sonoma County maybe 4 years before that, maybe 3 years before that from Texas, and she fell in love with wine. And so while she's teaching these classes, she's learning about wine. And I don't know, 15 years later, 12 years later, she becomes an MW. The first female MW on the West Coast.
I was going to say, the first one.
Yeah, and she did that in 2011.
And she's so kind,
and
so generous, and so approachable. That's what I love the most about her. And then, of course, the impressive letters that take a long time and endless amount of energy and so many sleepless nights to obtain.
And I still see her on a regular basis and talk to her. And, we were at Texom together a few years ago. And she called me and she goes, "Oh, my flight's late. And I said, "Oh, don't worry about it." And her flight came in late, of course. She missed the dinner with all the MSs and MWs. And I said, "Don't worry, you can join us." And there was a group of, I think, 14 of us going out to dinner. And she joined us. And but that's what we do.
Yes, and that's also part of the trade culture on the other side. You talked a little bit about interaction with the consumer. But the reason the community is so irresistible is because people are so generous and so interactive. There's really not a competitive spirit about it. Everybody's trying to better themselves in their own way and become a better version of who they are professionally. But there's no kind of pettiness. There's no, hey, it's me versus you mindset.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what you're describing. It's just like people get together and it doesn't matter how much notoriety they have.
Sure.
They don't wave it around.
No. It's interesting. My first national sales job was at Hansel Vineyards. And Jean Arnold Sessions hired me. And her late husband, Bob Sessions, one of the greatest winemakers I've ever met, about a year and a half into me working there, he told me, he goes, "Yeah, back when in the 60s, we used to get together to park and nap on I don't know if it was the second or third Saturday of every month." And I'm like, "Well, who would you get together with?" He's like, "Oh, all the other winemakers." And we would talk about what we were doing and we'd talk about what we were learning. And I said, "Who are the other winemakers?" And he's like, "Oh, Robert and Peter were there." And he goes, "This is when they used to talk to each other." And he goes, "Oh, and Andre was there." I'm like, "Chelachev?" He goes, "Yeah." And so he's naming all these people, and I'm like, wow, they're all legendary winemakers. And I said, "So how was it?" He's like, "Well, to put it in perspective to what you kids talk about today, we were all version 1.0. No one was worth 1.5. No one was 2.0. We were all the same. We all knew a little bit more than the next person about one specific thing. But no one knew all of it. And that's why we would get together and we would share winemaking and what we were learning." And that went away for a while and it's kind of come back. And now a lot of people are sharing what they're doing. I talk to colleagues of mine all the time that travel the country and sell wine and tell stories. And I'm like, "Well, what are you doing differently? And how are you doing this?" And we're trying to figure out together.
Just so much better than being territorial. Literally, and saying, "Okay, I'm not going to share my secrets." The thing of it is, even if you do, the other person would do it differently. They would have their own version of it.
Hopefully they do it differently. Because if they don't take ownership and make it their own, then it's not authentic.
Absolutely.
So
post-graduation, did you go to Hansel or no? Actually, you went to Fritz.
So I was Fritz Winery and Landmark Vineyard. So I was at Fritz and they said, "Well, you need to do an internship at a winery." I said, "I already have a job." They said, "Nope, not a job. You need to do an internship. It could be a paid internship, but it can't be what you have." And so I ended up at Landmark Vineyards doing the same thing I was doing at Fritz Winery.
Right.
But now it was a internship, right? And drive was closer, which was nice. And it showed me a different aspect of what I was doing because it was a different winery, different wines, different people. It was on Highway 12. instead of on the northern part of Dry Creek.
Yeah.
And I did that, and that was pretty fun.
Yeah.
And when I graduated, one advice that Clay Fritz told me, the owner of Fritz, Clay goes, "I'll give you one piece of advice." And I've always remembered that. He said, before you go work on the supplier side, go work for a distributor as a sales rep. Because the only way you can work with sales reps and they'll respect you is if you've done what they're doing.
Smart.
Because he goes, look, this is a guy who got his degree in theology and I think geography or geometry or something. And he goes, and here I am selling wine with people. He goes, I don't have that respect because I never did what they do. And this was in 2001, 2002. So I ended up working for Henry Wine Group as a sales rep. And I did that for 7 months. And I thought I was going to do it for 2 years.
Uh-huh.
And I got a phone call one day from Dr. Liz Tosh.
Mm-hmm.
And she goes, I just had lunch with Jean Arnold Sessions from Hansel, and she's looking for a national sales manager. Do you know anyone? So Liz and I played phone tag for about a week and a half. And I kept saying, I have someone who'd be great. And she'd call back and I would miss it. And finally we connected. And she goes, I'm dying to know who is this person that you want to recommend? I was like, me. And she dead silence. And finally, after 30 seconds, she goes, are you not happy? I said, no, I'm happy, but I could be happier. And she goes, okay, well, let me give you Jean's office number and you can give her a call. What she ended up doing without realizing it is she gave me Jean's cell phone number.
Oops.
Which worked out to my advantage because I called on a Friday at 2 p.m. West Coast time. Jean picks up the phone and it's 5 p.m. East Coast time and she's in Boston getting ready to go to an event that no longer exists called Spinazzola. It's 30 below. And she picks up the phone. She goes, I picked it up because my glasses weren't on. I couldn't see the number. I thought Bob was calling me because it was a 707 number. And she said, I told her who I was. And she goes, do you like to travel? Because she's miserable in 30 below in a cab going to this event where she's going to pour wine for 8 hours. She goes, do you like to travel? I said, of course I like to travel. She goes, what do you think of Boston? It's 30 below. I said, oh, I have family there. I'm sure they can help keep me warm. And she goes, why don't you send me your resume? And so I sent her my resume. She called me back. And this is when Hansel was in the middle of a TCA crisis. So they weren't selling any wine. And they were building a new winery. And so they were in the midst of all this change. And so I ended up meeting with her. She interviewed me. And then she called me back for a second interview. And I'm in the second interview. Bob Sessions walks in the middle of it. He opens the door and just storms in. He goes, Jean, who's this handsome young man you're talking to? And she's like, Bob, I'm in the middle of an interview. He's like, oh, I'm sorry. She goes, it's okay. Do you want to see his resume? Kind of like, why did you interrupt? And so Bob looks over and he goes, I see here you lived in Glendale. He goes, I grew up in Glendale. Bob Sessions is saying this. I'm like, Glendale, California? He goes, yeah. I said, cool. He goes, where'd you go to high school? I said, I went to Hoover High School. He goes, I went to Hoover High School. I'm like, you went to Herbert Hoover High School in Glendale between Burbank and Pasadena? He goes, yeah. He goes, I was class of 49. I'm like, oh, I'm class of 94. I said, simple case of dyslexia. We might as well have gone to school at the same time. And he turns around to Jean. He goes, go ahead and hire this man. And Jean goes, there go my bargaining chips. And Bob walks out. And Jean looks at me and she goes, well, how would you like to come work at Hansel? And I started at Hansel.
How cool is that?
I'd never done national sales. I didn't know anything about what I was doing. And I just knew I had to listen to Jean.
So I just want to raise a glass, and we'll talk about what's in a glass momentarily, but you had this almost instinctual way of reaching out, saying, I want this. I'm going to ask for it.
Yeah.
And we had a brief discussion before the recording that half the success is showing up.
Yeah.
And you were there, present, and things aligned. Granted, a bit of luck.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, you just shared with our viewers and listeners that you wanted something and you found the internal courage to ask.
Yeah. I had nothing to lose. Worst case scenario, she would say, I'm not interested. And I still had a job.
Yeah. Good one.
Yeah.
So cheers to that. and we're having a Chardonnay from 2018, which is a new vintage, I assume.
It is. It is. This is the 2018 Estate Chardonnay
Mm-hmm.
is from our vineyard in Carneros. The vineyard was purchased in 1973. It was a 180-acre ranch, 130 planted at its peak. Currently, there's about 70 acres doing some replanting. And there's Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Merlot, little Cap Franc there. And this is 100% Chardonnay from our estate vineyard there in Carneros on Old Sonoma and Buman.
You know, this is a certain Chardonnay. Admit, you guys missed out on the unfiltered one. I really enjoyed it before we started taping. They both share similar characteristic, really bright acidity.
Yeah. And it's funny because all the wines that we make here are true to their sense of place. They're not trying to be something they're not. Our Chardonnay is not trying to be white Burgundy. It's Carneros Chardonnay.
Yeah.
I think if you realize what you are and you stay true to that, it's the best way to do it. And so our wines stay true to the vineyards. There's not a lot of manipulation.
Yep.
It's pick the fruit, let it do its thing. And Ted Henry, our winemaker, does such a great job at these clean, precise
Very
wines.
pure. Yeah.
And, Clos Du Val went through a complete renaissance period over the last 5 years now, where we shifted everything to an estate model. And our production went from a peak of 90,000 cases down to 35,000 cases. And the quality of all the wines really stand out. And, it's a Chardonnay. You can get away with just making a Chardonnay. Most people don't sit there and contemplate a California Chardonnay. But, Ted has this way of precise winemaking.
There's a bit of a stigma that follows California Chardonnay that leans towards heavier, buttery, oaky style. This is nothing of the sort. So if you like you just articulately described, clean, precise, focused, there's a bit of a tension there.
Yeah.
Really fantastic acidity would really stand up to a steak in
my
book.
Yeah.
That's what's in my glass.
What's funny is this Chardonnay, it's a chameleon.
Yeah.
In the sense that if I have 10 people in front of me and I taste 10 people and I tell them, write down what you think of the wine, half the people say, oh, I love how oaky it is. And half the people say, oh, I love that it's not oaky and the bright acidity. And it has this way of playing with people. It's not a big oaky, buttery Chardonnay by any stretch of the imagination, but it does have some oak. It has partial mallow. It's about 20% new French oak, but it's really well integrated. And to me, it's a fun wine. I like starting wine dinners off with this wine. It just pleases everyone.
Yeah, no, I can see my mouth is watering. I actually just retasted it because I was musing in my mind about the finish. It has quite a long finish. And oftentimes it's that juicy acidity that makes your mouth water, makes you taste it longer.
Yeah.
So you don't even know whether or not it's an actual finish or what your own palate is performing like.
Yeah.
But I find it utterly fascinating. And a lot of times, like you said, Chardonnay is just a blank canvas that takes on the personality of the maker.
Yeah.
In this case, if I were to taste it blind, I would say Carneros, just because cooler climate.
Yeah.
Anyway, good stuff.
Yeah.
So you're selling wine at this point.
I'm traveling the country.
Traveling a lot.
But it's funny. A lot of people say, "Oh, well, like my title, director of sales." If I had a choice to put a title, it's storyteller, because Jean Arnold taught me. She goes, behind all of this wine and all the wineries and all the tanks and all the oak barrels and all the vineyards is a story, and that story is bigger than, oh, here's a wine, here's a score I got.
Yeah.
Why is that wine what it is? Where did it start from? Where did it go? What lucky things happened to it along the way? I mean, none of it, you can't say, oh, I'm going to plan it from beginning to end and it's going to go exactly as planned.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, if you look at the story here at Clos Du Val, first vintage 1972, Napa Valley, which later became Stag's Leap Wine District, right? There was no AVA. It was just Napa Valley. There wasn't much going on in Napa Valley. And that first vintage ended up 4 years later in a tasting in France. And it did well. It didn't get the first, second, or third place. I think it got seventh or eighth or something.
Mm-hmm.
But the French were like, no, our wines need more time. So they redid that exact tasting in 10 years, in 1986 for the 10th anniversary. And Clos Du Val came in first. Well, first of all, the first vintage of this wine was included in a tasting that no one knew was ever going to be put together when they started the winery. And then Napa Valley's on the map and they're riding that wave. And then they redo the tasting and all of a sudden Clos Du Val shows really well.
Yeah.
They didn't know that's going to happen, but that's part of the story. And being able to tell that story to people, like you said earlier, people don't remember the taste or whatever. They remember how they feel.
Mm-hmm.
And wine is so emotional. It's how you feel.
Yeah.
Usually you're celebrating something good. Sometimes you're remembering something bad, right? But whether it's good or bad, you still have that one constant.
Mm.
And it has these little memory triggers. So I can tell you dinners I've had and the wine. I can't, and then sometimes I'll remember the food we had because of that wine, but I'll tell you everyone who was around. I can tell you conversations based off that wine because it's a memory trigger.
I find it so interesting that you said sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. The majority of the conversations center on positive,
Sure.
joyous, convivial.
Sure.
But I've often said, somewhat in jest, but also as a practical piece of advice, if you're having a really bad day, open your best wine.
Yeah.
Wine can be a fantastic companion when you're blue or life's just really knocking you down.
Yeah.
And it's okay to open that bottle and drink it by yourself. And
Sure.
those sound selfish because wine is that story that helps you really look at yourself in that moment in time,
Mm-hmm.
maybe without judgment, but just as an old friend. It's a bit of a facilitator. And I found this to be true in my highly personalized experiences. I actually lived that. I opened some of the bottled wine that I was arguably should have been hoarding to share. And it works.
Yeah.
There's something very special qualitatively about wine, unlike any other beverage, that acts as the sounding board, as odd as it sounds. Would you agree?
Absolutely. My father passed away when I was 12 years old. He was 46. And he taught me, it's funny because a lot of people look at death and they think that's so sad. But if you take the learning lessons from it, you can live a great life, right? Because you never know when your time's going to come.
Yeah.
So you have to live life, not be afraid of whatever might happen down the line. So a lot of times I have this amazing bottle. I'm like, you know what? Tomorrow might never come. So let's just enjoy it. And it's not a sad way of living, or it's not a pessimistic way. It's the reality of can't take it with you. Your friends will take it when you're gone, but you can't take it with you. And so, like the other night, we opened a bottle. I accidentally opened a wrong single vineyard Burgundy. And at first I was like, I didn't want to open that today. I only had one bottle and it was gifted to me. And I put it in the rack, but I put it in the section where I had another bottle. And all of a sudden, Jenny, my fiance, is like, wow, this wine is really good. I said, yeah. And I take a sip. I'm like, oh, this is really good. I said, hold on. And I looked at the bottle and I said, oh, shit.
Mm-hmm.
I opened up the wrong bottle. And she looked at me. She goes, maybe you opened up the right bottle. I said, yeah, but we're having burgers at home. And she goes, yeah. And it's the right bottle. And I said, you know what? You're right. And I just let it go. And we enjoyed that bottle. So great.
Wise woman.
Behind every good man is an even better woman, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, with wine, whether it's good or bad, you're celebrating something.
Yes.
And I think we're so good at celebrating success and life.
Yeah.
Sometimes we forget to celebrate failure and death.
Yeah.
Because in failure, you need to celebrate failure. And part of that celebration is learning from it, so you don't make the same mistake.
That's right.
One thing Jean told me when I first started, she goes, listen, you're going to screw up. I guarantee you're going to screw up. And that's okay. Make sure you're the first one to come tells me that you screwed up, and we'll figure it out together. Make sure I don't find out from someone else. And that taught me something. It's like, you know what? Mistakes will happen. but it's a mistake. It's not done on purpose. And even if it is, come clean, figure it out, move on. Because if you try to cover it up, then you're spending your whole life trying to cover up this one thing that probably wasn't a big deal to begin with. So, I've learned to celebrate all of it.
Sounds like a great mentor.
She is. She still is. We see each other. We talked on the phone quite a bit. We see each other a few times a year.
Yeah.
She's a great woman.
The conclusion of this interview can be found in the next podcast, already available for your download. Thanks again for tuning in to the official podcast of Palate Exposure, featuring Ilona Thompson.